All right, today we're jumping into a really provocative new book called Common Resolve, A Republic Reborn. People are calling it a modern-day manifesto, and what we're going to do is break down its main arguments, just to understand the claims it's making about America right now. So, let's get right into it.
The book kicks off with this quote, and man, it really sets a serious tone from page 1. The author, who goes by Elias Cromwell, isn't just offering an opinion here. He's trying to sound an alarm, framing this as a huge warning about a nation he thinks is at a tipping point.
So what is this book really? Well, the author makes it pretty clear he sees it as a common sense for our time, like Thomas Paine's was. The whole argument is that America is facing tyranny all over again, but it's a much sneakier, subtler version this time around. And it's written as a kind of rallying cry for what the author calls the forgotten Americans.
Okay, so here's how we're going to walk through it, following the book's structure. It's split right down the middle. First, we'll look at the diagnosis of the problem, which has 3 parts. And then we'll get into the prescription, which lays out a 2-part solution.
So the book's diagnosis starts with this idea it calls the phantom crown. The argument here is pretty bold. It draws a straight line from the King of England in 1776 to the powers that be today, claiming a new, invisible kind of royalty has taken over without anyone really noticing. So here's the comparison the book makes. You've got the 1776 version of tyranny, super visible, a king, a crown, the whole deal. Then it argues you've got today's new tyranny, and according to the author, this one is run by what he calls unseen masters. Powerful government agencies nobody elected, huge corporations, and courts that aren't accountable to the people. So the point the book is making is that while the look has changed, that feeling of being ruled has actually come back.
All right, so if this phantom crown is the new power, then how is that power enforced? That's what the next part of the book, Chains of Tyranny, is all about. It digs into what the author sees as the modern tools of control, ones that aren't written in ink, but in computer code.
The book points to what it calls 4 key chains, and it argues these things all work together to build a kind of prison without any walls. You've got digital surveillance watching everything you do online, speech controls that can slap a misinformation label on things people say, then there's financial control, like the threat of being debanked if you have the wrong opinions, and the book warns that all of this is pushing us towards a social credit system, where just being a part of society depends on how compliant you are.
Now, this third part of the diagnosis gets really personal. It focuses on the family. The author has this whole chapter on what he calls the courtroom cartel, and he describes it as a direct, systemic attack on the American family, which the book views as like the absolute foundation of our free country.
The book lays out this 4-step process that it alleges is happening. It claims it all starts with federal money, specifically funds like Title IV-E, which it says gives states a financial reason to get involved in custody battles and child removals. Then, according to the author, something as simple as an anonymous tip can kick off an investigation, pushing families into these closed-door family courts with no juries. The book's conclusion is that this creates a system where foster care and adoptions become profitable for the state, basically turning, in its words, family separation into a business.
And to really make this point hit home, the author includes several personal stories. This quote here, from a mom in Wyoming, is used to get to the heart of the book's argument, that there's a system out there that's not playing by the normal rules of justice, and it's having these devastating impacts on families.
Okay, so after laying out that pretty heavy diagnosis of the problem, the book switches gears. It moves into its prescription for how to fix things. And the very first step is this really challenging idea the author calls separation.
Now, this is a super important point. The author is very, very clear that separation does not mean what you probably think it means. It's not political secession, it's not breaking up the country, no. It's defined as a peaceful, principled choice to stop participating in systems the book calls corrupt or unconstitutional. So we're talking about things like pulling away from certain global organizations or pushing back against what it sees as the federal government getting too involved in local issues.
So if separation is the big idea, the final part of the book, The Path of Resolve, is about what you're supposed to do. This is where the manifesto tries to become more of a practical guide. Laying out actual grassroots steps it encourages its readers to take.
The actions the book proposes are all incredibly local and citizen-driven. The whole point seems to be shifting power away from these far-off entities and bringing it back home, to the community. So that means everything from starting small groups to study the Constitution to backing local officials who are seen as defending constitutional rights.
The common thread here is rebuilding civic muscle from the ground up, with a huge focus on holding officials accountable to their oath of office.
And that brings us to the book's final challenge. Common Resolve doesn't pretend to have every single answer, but it leaves its reader with one very fundamental question to wrestle with. It asks you to decide, are you a subject that's being managed by a big system, or are you a citizen of a free republic? It's a provocative question to end on for a book that's definitely designed to make you think. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.